Okay.
You want me to turn this off?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, Chris.
Actually, I got some notes. But
He has some
I'm-
notes. so
I
why
do
don't
have
you
notes,
run
but I
yours?
was gonna
Okay,
do,
I'm glad to hear that. I think it's the lights above us, John, not the wrong lights. Okay, all right.
They're in there somewhere.
I'm gonna put mine on the.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, so the
I can
mystery
go.
always exists when appraisals occur.
Yep.
What is actually taking place? So Chris, actually, John and I have known Chris. I've known Chris going back to maybe 1989 or 1990.
Yeah, 90,
Right around there.
Long time.
Long time, as a matter of fact. So since then, let me explain his credentials. He has a degree in finance. He actually has a broker's license also. He's a licensed general contractor, right?
Thanks, yeah.
Certified general appraiser. He is also a licensed, well, actually, he is a certified residential appraiser. Also, he has an MAI designation. And to not go into all the details, but and an SRA appraisal designation. But as an MAI appraiser, he's involved in litigation, not causing litigation. But that is, first of all, it's the highest form or designation associated with an appraiser. Typically, they're also involved in complex commercial transactions, luxury residential valuations, government agency projects, estate planning and taxation, and the MEI designation is considered the gold standard of the appraisal industry. So I think we're going to have a lot of questions. He's going to talk to us about the methodology he goes through, but I think more importantly, the questions that you may have are going to benefit us most. So let's welcome Chris Pierce. Chris, thank you for coming today.
Thank you. As we just mentioned, Rich and I'm gonna say like 1990, 91. Yeah. So it's been a while, and I actually worked with Rich, but I really kind of worked for you.
Yeah.
For a while. I was just doing some consulting. I did development for like 8 or 10 years, something like that. So that's where I got my contractor's license and where I got my broker's license. My dad was a builder, so I've just had that. I swung a hammer for 8 or 10 years when I was working with him. So
Actually worked.
yeah. So I've done a lot of stuff in real estate. Been doing it for a long time. So I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. Just to kind of give you my background, I actually lived in Irvine for 32 years. So been around, know the area pretty well. I haven't been here for 9. So it's been a little while. When my son went to college, he went to UCLA. He was the youngest of my 3 kids. We packed up, moved to bank money. I bought a property down there, tore it down, long story, tore it down, and then we built 4 townhomes there. So
Yeah, it's beautiful.
yeah, worked out great. I live in one actually and rent 3. That was only supposed to be temporary, but it's permanent now. So that's kind of my experience, the whole development side. So I have a pretty good background on that side of it. And then, like as Rich mentioned, I'm a broker, contractor, got the MAI designation. So I do a lot of commercial stuff now. I still do residential, but mainly commercial. I was just going to say, like right now, I have 8 properties, 8 appraisals I'm doing 2 commercials, 3 SFRs, 2 4-unit appraisals, and 2 big commercial parcels of land. So I still get out and about. I'm actually doing an appraisal on a property in Newport Beach right after this, and then I'm doing one in Huntington Beach. One's kind of a mixed use where they have a commercial on the first floor and then residential on the second floor. And then I'm doing one in Huntington Beach. It's an SFR, but I do a lot of flip appraisals. So I have one client that's called Merchants Mortgage. I'm sure nobody's heard of them, but all they do is flips. So that's their big thing. And it's private money. I do mainly private money now. I do some estate work and then some, ironically, do a lot of divorce work, but kind of try to stay away from that. And then I kind of stayed away from the conventional stuff just because it's not big money makers anymore. There's a lot of competition in that. So I tend to stay away from that and more towards the commercial side. So that's my background. Again, lived in Irvine for 32 years, I have 3 kids, I have 2 grandkids. I got another one on the way.
Wow,
Yes, yeah. So don't know how that's going to work out. So I got 2 grandsons, so we'll see. And my daughter's, she ironically works for Berkshire Hathaway in sales. And then she went off on her own probably 2 years ago, 3 years ago, maybe. And so I helped her with a lot of stuff. In fact, getting to her, I actually helped her. She'd had 2 listings that I helped her do some pricing on it. which is kind of what I'm going to get into next, just real quick, is just the market, what I'm seeing in the market right now. And you guys really know more about it than I do. I always say the agents really have the pulse on the market. I can look at all the data, but you guys see the stuff, the action happening. Most of the stuff I'm seeing is flat, slightly going down. Attached product is definitely going down in most areas. Irvine tends to be kind of on its own a little bit, where it's a little bit different. But I did look, because I lived in Northwood, I did look for attached stuff in there before I came up here. And I always look at the arrows. I don't know if you guys, when you see them, that's what I look at a lot. And I think there was 19 listings of attached product in Northwood, and then 7 of them had arrows going down.
So Chris, when you say prices are going down, when ultimately, yeah, the arrows show the asking price going down, but is the closing price going down versus?
I'm seeing it happen in a good example. So I was helping my daughter do this. She went to San Diego State, so she had a sale. It's called Escala. It's kind of a planned community down there, and we're trying to price it. There was a sale in July, a closing in July. It was $1.2 million, and she had a model match to it, very similar property. And there was a list. There's 4 listings in there, very similar, and the highest one was $1.1 million. So just from that time, from July to right now, it dropped. San Diego market's different than Orange County, which is different than LA. So you just got to look at them, and all the markets are different. So I'm kind of seeing that as a general trend. Who knows if it's going to continue. When I first met Rich back in the 90s, that's when everything got really slow. And again, Rich started, I think it was Southern California funding that, yeah. When you guys started that, I went off in the appraisal because we kind of figured there was a better way to do stuff. But it's, that market, the affordability index was so low that although rates were coming down, values actually came down at the same time. So, it's one of those things that same thing could happen right now. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I see a lot of people talking that, hey, when rates come down, values are going to go through the roof. I don't see that happening. You just don't know. I can't predict that. Nobody can. But I just think there's so many people out there that are like, my daughter has 2 clients that are ready to buy, but they both just said, we're going to wait 6 months to a year because we think values are going to come down. So it's a supply and demand thing, as you guys know better than I do. And all of a sudden, if the demand goes away and that supply goes up, you'll see things come down. Again, I don't see things, flattening out, going too crazy. But, it's just something to kind of look at. And that's just kind of my thoughts on it.
Is any of that caused by overpricing the properties?
I think, sometimes I think so. Sometimes pricing, I just look at stuff and I'm like,
Yeah.
where'd you come up with the price?
It's the seller.
Yeah.
The sellers that raise
And honestly, that's 90% of the time, that's what it is, when I look at it. So, I just, I'm just like you guys. I got the same data and same information. You guys probably have a lot more than I do in reality. So you kind of look at it that way. But pricing is really, really important. And I always say, I think right now things are slowing down a little bit, but if it's priced right, it'll sell. So like, for instance, my daughter, I know I keep using her for example, but she had 2 sales listings in Escondido. So ironically, that's where they were. But we priced one at $999.9 because we wanted to be under the $1 million. We thought we'd get multiple offers on it. Didn't get any offers on it. And this was in August. So not maybe July, not too long ago. She ended up selling it for, I think, $975. So, we looked at it, tried to price it right, and it just didn't move, just didn't move. So I think it took about 45 days to sell. And it's probably back in June, now that I think about it. So, you guys are really good at it. I mean, I always look for the agents for a lot of information, to say,
So
hey.
do you take offense to that when they're giving you the comps in the area?
Absolutely
And you're meeting them at the
No.
property?
Not at all, not at all.
So it is helpful? if
Very
they're bringing
helpful,
information to you?
absolutely, yeah. And I was gonna get into that. And
Okay.
again, where I say, I just use the term pulse. You guys have the pulse on the market. And so, that's just, well, I got 5 offers on this property. Well, as an appraiser, I don't know that, and we're gonna pick the best of the 5 versus I don't have any offers. I got 1 offer on this thing and that's it. I gotta run with it, So that's the thing that's real, real important. I don't take offense to anything that anybody gives me. The more information that I have, the better, when they come out there. But definitely I always say you have to have comps, you have to be prepared. Nothing worse than going into, as an appraiser, and I don't have an ego, but a lot of them do. You go in there and all of a sudden, they don't have any information for you. They're 10 minutes, 15 minutes late, and it's like, oh, come on, and I swear, I've seen appraisers purposely come in low because the agents were jerks. So I've seen it happen. So just kind of be mindful of that. I don't think that's that big of a deal anymore, but I know people have done it. A good friend of mine.
There you go.
Yeah.
Right.
So
That says a
I
lot.
always say prepared. My daughter does all the comps. Here's comps. Here's what we feel are the best comps. Like kind properties, please use like kind properties. If a buyer's buying that house, he should buy all the comps that you're giving. He should buy that comp 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Better be able to buy all those. Those are like kind properties. So for instance, it's a 1,500 square foot house. That buyer can't afford or doesn't want a 3,500 square foot house. They may want it, but they can't afford it, say. So always use like kind properties when you're handing them over. And just the more information, the better. Do you guys use Inside Tract at all? You ever? heard of
Some
that?
people do, yes.
Yeah, I use that a lot
Yeah.
because I'm getting too lazy and don't want to measure anything anymore. But
So that's what you use when coming up with square footage?
a lot of times, if I use that, if it's in a track setting, I feel comfortable with it. Yeah, I will use that.
It's easier if it's in a tract setting.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Unique
Yeah.
properties like Laguna Beach is a little more difficult.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally different. And you're comparing, apples to apples, that's a Model 2, that's a Model 3 and Model 4. And you're not making any adjustments on square footage anyway. If it's, if somebody says it's a little bit different where you're not making an adjustment, but I like to use those. And again, most of the stuff I'm doing, I don't really need to be exact. So like if I'm doing an estate appraisal, public records, and I always like when I do commercial properties, I always have 2 square footages. So like I'll take, and you guys aren't doing commercial, but I'll take like leases, I'll take public records. I do a lot of measuring, believe it or not, off Google. So if it's something's just a 1-story, it's very accurate. I've checked it numerous times. Do that. So I always like if I can get 2 different square footages for a property, if it's on public records and it's on Inside Track, then I'll use that. I feel comfortable with that. Unfortunately for me, I'm probably the worst judge of what square footage is. I might look at something, well, it's 1,500 square feet and it's 17, or it's 2,000, it's 24. So I don't use my own judgment. I'm just not very good at it, so. But that pops up. Another thing, I just always tell people, just be friendly just try to be on time. Like I mentioned before, I think it's real important to do, supply as much information as you can. I always would give them I told my daughter to do the MLS printout, public records, again, have your own comps and all that stuff. So that's really, really, really important. And it just, again, sometimes from my perspective, watch the attitude. Sometimes you get a little bit, right now it's been such a seller's market, that I think people just don't care, and that will change at some point in time. It's probably changing as we speak. One other thing I wanted to mention, and you could probably go into this a little bit more than I could. I'm sure you guys talked about it. This whole commission thing's kind of weird, I always thought that the commission structure was maybe not the best thing in the wide world, but it worked. And everybody kept saying about the commissions, oh, you got to pay this. Commissions used to be 6%, and then they went to 5%, and I see a lot of 4s. So I don't understand why people say that, that commissions aren't negotiable. To me, they were always negotiable. My daughter would take a lot of commissions at a 1.5, so, and it's just her. She's just a broker now and
Does
does her own
that
thing.
come into play when you are coming to a conclusion?
That hasn't come up yet. That's actually a really good question. But I would always for me, I would just add both the commissions, and that would be your total price. The problem is the financing side.
Yeah.
And you guys know it on the financing side better. I don't know what the mortgage gurus are saying.
Believers or not, if the presentation is such that the commissions are separate from concessions, then Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are not including that in regards to what the cap concessions will be, and they're allowing buyers to pay that. So but it almost seems to me, and this is something that the MLS committee has been debating, it almost seems to be that if the buyer's paying the commissions plus the purchase price of the house, that's ultimately the purchase price of the
Right.
house.
Absolutely.
So when you're appraising the house, how are you looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to always go above, I know, it's terrible, sounds terrible, but I tend to go above the purchase price. And I'm a round guy. So if, the purchase price is 495, I'm gonna appraise it for 500 grand. Or maybe even a little bit higher if I need to. Obviously, I have to support everything I do, but there's always a little bit of,
Mhm.
give or take on an appraisal. But yeah, that's the whole thing. And it makes a mess of everything. It really, really does. And it'll be interesting to me to see when the market changes and it's a buyer's market. All of a sudden you got 5 listings in a neighborhood and you got 1 buyer. It's like if I was representing that buyer, I'd say I want 10%. But you can't do that. But you know what I'm saying? Things will change, and it's been such a seller's market for so long that I can see trouble ahead with all this thing. And I don't know about that lawsuit, if that's final or if that can be
It's
appealed.
not,
Okay, I just see that being appealed at some point in time and that change. And maybe call me old fashioned, but I just like the old way. Everything was negotiable. It really was. And people say it wasn't. It was, to me, you don't want to pay it, don't pay it, on the commission side of it. So,
how about when people come to you and say, okay, my house is better than yours, and I have all these improvements and upgrades, what's your approach or thought process in appraising a subject property?
yeah, I was helping one of my appraisers. So I just have my own company, and then I contract out with 3 people. I've had as many as like 12 appraisers at one time. Where was it 205 through 207? That's when everything was just insane. We were probably doing like 400 to 500 a month. So it's crazy. But I was helping when Carrie, the gal that does contract work, she did an appraisal over by the Orange Ball, the Great Park over there. And so the people bought the house, it had a pool in it. And so they were remodeling the backyard, and they were putting in 250 grand into the backyard after it already had a pool. So it's like, all right, how much of that can you really justify in the market? So, and they bought the house last year for 3.6. I think we ended up appraising it for like 3.750, 3.775. And 2, like you're talking about all the improvements, it's like how much you're really paying. I mean, sometimes we don't get real numbers.
Does it matter if you get real numbers? If they give you the contracts and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of look at it. Obviously, I'm looking at when you're comparing them to everything on MLS, and the photos on MLS are really, really good, compared to 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I know my daughter, she just hires somebody to do them. And she said it's just easier that way. And so you get really good photos. And that's how you're really comparing them. It's hard to say, it's like, hey, this property is worth 3,725,000. It's worth 3.7 to 3.8 in my mind, somewhere in there. I like to do a range. That's kind of where I'm at on a lot of that stuff. But it's difficult to really pull. The old days, somebody had a pool in the backyard, and that's kind of all they had. Now they got, they have custom kitchens. You got living areas out in the backyard. You really can drop 250 into a backyard, no problem whatsoever. So
do you get credit for that?
yeah. Yeah. A lot of times if I can't find anything, what I'll do is say, hey, I'm putting in 250. I'm going to give you so much per dollar that you're spending. So if I can somehow support it with a comp, obviously I will, but I'll do 50, 75 cents to the dollar on it. I think if you go dollar for dollar, you can do it on a brand new house. I think you can do that.
So pools, that's always a question, right?
Yeah, always.
I see, when you're trying to take comps to the subject property, and there's an addition or subtraction, maybe it's $50,000 or $60,000 for a pool. Doesn't matter if you spend $200,000.
I know.
That's kind of what I see with those appraisals.
Yeah, and it's just unfortunately it's not accurate. You got to let the market do its thing, and you want to pull it out of the market, abstract it out of the market. But like you said, nobody's going to spend 250 on something and not think they're going to get at least half or 3/4 of it back. I wouldn't do it. It's a waste of money.
But I don't know if anybody understand what I'm saying, because let's assume the comp has 3 bedrooms and the comparables have 4. Well, they're going to give a $10,000 reduction of the comparable for a bedroom. These are these standardized costs, it seems like.
Yeah.
Or standardized costs of completing that bedroom that you're using in many cases, not because of actually what was spent.
Right. It's just the market. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
just the
You
market.
extract. A lot of times with like townhomes and condos, you go 1, 2, 3, you can really see the difference. It's significant. A lot of times 50, 75, 100 grand, just for room count or bedroom count. So, that's one of the easier ones that you can actually do. So like if I'm doing appraising a condo or townhome that's 2 bedrooms, I'm only using 2-bedroom comps. Now, if I need to get a little funny with it, I'll throw in a 3-bedroom comp. So if I need to bracket something, if it's a high price or something like that, the sale or something like that, I'll pull in something that I know is better, then I can adjust it down.
So that's a good point to bring up in regards to the comps that you may be using. Because I'll see appraisals with properties that are pending. And usually what you need for uniform appraisal, you need what, 5, maybe six different comps possibly? And then I see appraisals sometimes, and if you can find them
Yeah.
with pending sales,
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I use
not
pending.
necessarily properties that have closed.
Right.
And then so if we throw pending sales in together with homes that are on the market that are near a new housing tract, how do you approach that?
Well, I love pending sales. So a lot of times if I can't find a pending, I'll throw an active in. I tend to not go with a lot of comps. I tend to like to go with like 4 or 5 comps. 6 is kind of pushing it. When you get, the problem is you have 6 comparables, one of them's not a good comparable, just
Mhm.
throw it away, get rid of it, It's,
So
you
you don't
look
need
at,
6.
you really don't. I use 4 for kind of a typical house. I'll use 5 for a custom house, 6 if I really need it. I try not to, put a lot of, I just don't like to use a lot of comparables because it's just hard. The numbers kind of get screwy. And then all of a sudden you
So
look at.
lenders aren't requiring.
No, most lenders require 3 closed sales. Some of them will require a pending sale, and then some will require like a listing. I
So
do
you can
use
actually use
listing.
an active listing. also.
Yeah, I do them a lot. Yeah, if we need them. So, if it helps. But if it's a good comparable, just a good like kind property. And especially if you can get information, because when you call like the agents, you guys know this, you're not really supposed to give out the sales price, on the contract.
Right.
But a lot of times I'll just add, is it over or under a certain number? And then I'll kind of know, they don't have to tell me what it is, but, especially when things were going crazy and people were spending 100 grand, 200 grand over the purchase price. And I'm like, oh man.
Yeah.
And you're trying to adjust something and you don't really have the right price in there. So it really creates a problem.
So if somebody buys a property in a new housing tract, a year later they put it on the market and they're competing with the developer. Do you use the asking price that the developer is
Yeah.
attempting to obtain?
Yeah.
And what about do you ask about their concessions they're giving?
Yeah, if you can get information, new tracks are a little bit different, 'cause you really do want to use as many as you can from a new housing tract, just so you can compare the upgrades. Because some upgrades, you get 500 grand, 300 grand, 200 grand on a high end home.
Yeah.
It can really, really get up there, so you can make adjustments. And I do dollar for dollar adjustments on those because everything's brand new. So you kind of look at it that perspective. But typically a lender's going to require you to pull in a comparable from outside the project. It can be a brand new tract in it, but it needs to be in a different tract. But I always like to use, again, like kind properties. So if I'm like appraising a appraisal that's not for a lender, I do it a little bit differently. I pulled the best comps I can find. And if they're all on the same project, that's what I use. So yeah, that makes sense. And lenders just have their requirements. Fannie Mae, you guys know the whole, Fannie Mae, there's just a lot of different requirements on those. And over time, I've just I hate to say it, I'm not as in tune with those as much.
So we've had cases in which appraisals have not come in at the purchase price and then we contest it.
Yeah.
So what is it that an appraiser actually does when then it's asked to be contested? What can we do to fight to win the case here, right?
That's when you call me, right?
That's probably what I call you.
Yeah, it is. Now, I just, sometimes good example. So I have one client, a guy named Tom Williams. I've had a client forever, and he's an agent and does a lot of, fact is, that's the house I'm going to do at like 11:30 today. So I'm doing a pre-listing appraisal for him. But he had a house in Orange, and it was like I'm going to say his aunt's house or something like that. Anyway, he cleaned it all up. We appraised it. He always likes to have an appraisal to give. He literally gives it to the lender, the appraiser that comes out. He'll give him my appraisal. So he does that. And it was a VA of all things.
That's surprising.
Yeah, VA in Orange for $1.2 million purchase price. So yeah, so they do it. So he puts it on, I think he puts it on for like $1.2 million, somewhere right around there. The sales price is real close to that. Well, the appraiser from VA comes in and appraises at $1.05 million. Yeah, and we're going and he had 3 offers on it. And so we went back through and I looked at the other guy's appraisal And ironically, he didn't even include the best comparable that was there. So we, threw it back to him, said, he didn't even include this. So that appraisal is basically junk. So they came back and said, no, you're right. They gave
They
us
did.
full value.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
But you got to find fault in the other person's appraisal. Usually it's just comparable selection. And, they'll miss a couple comps here or there. So, that's what I do. And I do a lot. I mean, I'll do it with you once in a while,
Mhm.
but I do it quite a bit. I actually do a lot of review work, but it's commercial review work that I do. So,
How do you price or evaluate a view?
it's kind of that same
How
thing.
do you
as
add
with
that
the-
into-
Yeah,
into
well,
the-
you're trying to abstract it from the market. Obviously, if you can find a comparable that's got a view than one that doesn't.
Yeah.
It's.
But there's some views that are worth more than other views,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Being on the, John, what hole are you on in your golf course community? You're on a
What the view?
hole, yeah, what hole are you on? So depending on it,
On that, they,
you're on the 18th.
Yeah.
Right, wow, big spender there.
Obviously, more value on the 18th hole.
Yeah, and that's it versus the,
Interesting.
the second or third hole, the 18th, it's right by the clubhouse. You can do that. So, but you're trying to find different, like even that, like you said, what's a better view? And I'll tend to go back a year or two and then see if I can like find two sales at the same time. Even if you go back 3 or 4 years and one say doesn't have a view and one has a view, and you can, hopefully kind of get a number, even maybe a percentage, like a 5%, 10%, something like that. And you reference that and go back to that. And that's what I would typically do. So a lot of times I'll go back, MLS is great because it's got data all the way, I think back to 2000. It's really, I just did an
it
appraisal,
does, yeah.
2000 appraisal, what they call a retrospective. So, and that's what I'll do if you can do. Problem is, it's just a lot of time. It takes time to go through everything. And it's like, all right, it's like anything. How much time can you allocate, before you give up and just say, I can't find anything and just stick a number to it. But it's true,
I think that's the whole point here. This is, you look at the purchase contract, you have an obligation as an agent to give the seller all reports. However, you have no obligation to give the appraisal unless you're canceling based upon the appraised value, if it's coming in lower than the purchase price, because it's considered an opinion of value. And likewise with the square footage, if you see the square footage in the appraisal, if you're going to cancel because the square footage is different than what's shown on the MLS, it is not part of the appraisal contingency. It is part of the investigation contingency in regards to canceling properly also. So keep that in mind too. Do you measure a lot of properties or use all these?
If I
other-
have to.
If you have to.
No, I did. Yeah, I got a really good story for you. So I do, like I said, a lot of flips. And I was doing one. I was actually I have a house out in the desert. I was going up that way. I ended up going up in the mountains in Running Springs. They wanted it done. I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So anyway, I get there and it says on public records, it says 1,400 square feet. I get there. Well, the guy that's buying it doesn't show up. Okay. And I can't get inside, and it's got a second floor like that. So I really need to get inside to measure it. So the lender, this guy named Bo, he goes, hey, I got an old appraisal. I said, all right, send it to me. I'll look at it. We'll see if it makes sense, and then I'll use that sketch. So I get the appraisal, and it's, this thing's got a lot of ins and outs, but it's not a real difficult property measure. So I get it. Yep, looks right based on everything I have. I got photos all the way around. So it says 2,178 square feet. Okay, so I put that in the appraisal. Says the exterior information was supplied by the lender. Well, lo and behold, it's 1,700 square feet. So somebody actually went back out. So the appraisal that I got was off, which is wrong. And so the borrower filed suit against me on my E&O insurance. Yeah, I'm going like,
Of course.
yeah, great. So fortunately, I do a lot of litigation stuff. So I was like, bring it on. I'm covered. So the attorney from the E&O place called me up. So I went through everything, and basically they said, no, we're not covering it because you supplied him that information. He relied on that information, number one. Number two, he didn't show up. Nobody showed up at the inspection. They said there was a lockbox there. There was no lockbox there. So I ended up doing the appraisal based on the information that was provided to me. And that was it. And that's basically, they just said, no, we're not doing it. You screwed up. And I just told the guy, I said, you didn't show up. Show up, my God. And he had that appraisal that said 2,100 square feet, and then public records was 1,400 square feet. Show up. We got to figure out what there's a discrepancy on it. So and this guy ends up eating it. He just gave the property back to the bank.
So in regards to square footage, because many times the assessor's records may not be up to date, often it will reflect additions if there are building permits. So that's a question I think, when you tape something or you use something and it's different than the assessor's reported square footage, is there anything that you point out, or is there?
Yeah, I mean, I usually what I'll do is I'll just comment on it, just say, public record says this. My, inspection says this. It doesn't appear that there's any additions or any square footage that's added. So that looks like it's right. Public records is right about 80% of the time.
So your
That's my
obligation as an
opinion.
appraiser in regards to improvements that are permitted or not permitted.
Right, and then we'll find out to see if there's any. The problem with additions is hard, going into a city. I don't know if you guys been in cities lately. I mean, it could be 2 days. You might get lost in there for a week. I mean, it takes forever to get information from a city, especially with COVID. They just don't want to deal with anybody anymore. So a lot of times you got to give them a request and they'll give you the information. But yeah, so then you have to go through and see if something's been permitted. I a lot of times put it back onto the seller. Say, look, you need to supply the information on this. I'm not going to go there. I'm not being paid for that. If you want to pay me to do it, it's a day and it's a lot of money for me to go down there to do that. So,
So it's really not incumbent upon an appraiser to make a determination whether or not there are permits for any additions.
yeah, you need to make a comment on it. I mean, what
Okay.
I would just say, there's a discrepancy here. There doesn't appear to be a permit. Owner doesn't know of anything that's been permitted. It just looks like it's off public record. Public records is off. And that's how I
That's
see it.
an uncommon.
It's common, very
abnormality,
common. Yeah, it's very common. And especially you guys don't do a lot of stuff up in the mountains, but that stuff's terrible. I mean, those square footages are all wrong. They're just not even close. So it's like on that one I was just mentioning, public records at 1,400. And this thing didn't, I mean, it didn't look like an addition. I had the stupid sketch that had it at 2,100 and something, and it ended up being 1,750. So it wasn't, there's 3 separate distinct numbers there. So, that's really, really important. And like I said, I measure stuff all the time. But I tend to, the problem with me is not even the problem. In commercial stuff, so big, you can't measure it. So you're just relying on the information that you have. And like I did a custom home. There's actually this house down in San Juan. I don't know if you guys lived in San Juan for a little bit, but it's a
Yeah.
castle house
Mhm.
up on the hill.
Mhm.
And I appraised that like 5 times. I got involved in litigation, and it was, there's just no way for me to measure. We actually measured it, but we took them off the plans. But it's impossible for a guy. It had, I think, 10 turrets in it. So to get those just right, I mean, as an appraiser, there's no way you can do it. You're just going to be off. So you really can't rely. And a lot of times on the new homes too, there's within the house, there's a wall that's a setback. So you don't really know exactly what the square footage is. You can get close to them, but you're never really accurate. I actually like to just go off plans. That's my big thing. Whatever the plans say. I don't think I've ever seen a set of plans that are wrong. That just, they may change them, that you need to as-built plans. But like what you guys did your new house, I mean, those things they're right on.
Yeah.
They're spot on. So that's what I like to do. I've done a lot of custom homes. But yeah, the measuring thing, it's weird. You just got to go through and read it and just make sure everybody's doing their thing and they're doing the best they can. But the appraiser that did that one that was way off, I mean, I looked him up. He's been around for a long time. They missed it. Like one wall, they missed 6 feet, they were off. One wall, they were 3 feet off. And it's like, how do you get off on that stuff? I just, it's kind of scary at some point. You're like, all right, who's right here? I got 3 different numbers,
Yeah.
So I actually went back and measured that property.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, that's what happened. So on that, but you just don't know. You've run into a lot of weird stuff and strange stuff, especially up in that area. Again, around here, everything's pretty much tract
It's
homes.
pretty,
Yeah. And they're, everything's,
They're consistent.
yeah, good. It's real consistent. Yep, definitely for sure. But that again gets back to, when you meet an appraiser, just have all the information you can. If you got an inside track, use it, bring it. Hey, here's what the inside track says on this. Here's the comps, and then I go back a year on comps. Most lenders want you to only go back 6 months, but a lot of times you can find a good sale that's maybe 7 or 8 or 9 months old. I always include them, especially if it's a really good comp. There's no reason not to use
So
it.
let's assume it's a year old. Are you applying any type of a factor to?
Yeah,
Associated, bring
yeah.
that up to
Yeah.
today's value?
So, yeah, is it, I just, throw the dart at what
Right.
percentage? Yeah.
That's the one we're gonna get.
Dart.
Love it.
Okay.
But a lot of times I'll just look at it and say, hey, you know what? That was a legitimate sale, all good. This is a legitimate sale. If it's a purchase, something like that, whatever the difference is, what I'll put in there. That's really how you're supposed to do it. So, and the pricing is just, as I mentioned, it's just getting a little bit weird right now. Things are kind of all over the place and depending on where you're at. So, I'm doing a 4 unit in San Clemente, and there's obviously not any, 2 to 4s in Irvine, but down there's a lot of those things quit selling. They just stopped selling. They just couldn't get them to pencil. And so there's, I think, 3 sales this year down there. Which is not a lot. I'd say in 2021 or 2022, there's probably 25 sales. Everybody's
it.
buying everything up, and then all of a sudden it just stopped.
Mhm.
Yeah, so it's, the data's just short on that. And then the numbers are just coming down too. You just couldn't make stuff pencil. Well, obviously, interest rates are significantly important when you're doing those. And again, I know there's not a lot in Irvine, but a lot of Newport Beach, Costa Mesa. I don't know how far you guys cover. You mentioned, down there's a lot of stuff down there. But yeah, just people just couldn't get them to pencil.
Well, Chris has 5 minutes remaining, so if anyone has any questions, this is your opportunity.
Oh, yeah.
Quick question. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
Nice to see you. And I have a question regarding like multifamily units, let's say. So I came across, let's say, a couple of times I want to price it. But it's either, I'll go with the, structure of value, whatever I could get closest to find to it, or the income approach. What would be the best way if I want to price that property?
Well, 2 to 4s are kind of weird because a lot of times in the duplex, people would live in one and rent out the other. I have a 4-plex and mine are townhomes, but I live in one and rent 3 out. So when you get into like a 4-plex, it's really an income property. But on the form, they just do what they call a gross rent multiplier, which is just a really down and dirty way to value the property. So I think you just got to go. They're a little bit tricky. A lot of residential appraisers just won't appraise them because they're not involved in them. I've just done a lot of income stuff over the years, so they don't bother me. But yeah, to me, if I had one of those, I would tend to just get somebody out there that really knows what they're doing and really knows that market, and then get in there and just kind of, it's weird because you really kind of just, all right, I got a number this way, the sales comparison approach. If I use market rents and I use a gross rent multiplier, maybe one number's at 800,000 and one number's at $1 million. So what do I list this thing for? Where am I at? So you kind of got to start playing with them. And I've done so many of them that I'm just kind of used to it. And gross rent multipliers, when you're trying to kind of extract them from the market, a lot of times they're just not very accurate. So you might have, like, when you have 4 comparables, and on the form, the gross rent multiplier is 200, 225, 250, 275. Well, that's a huge range when it comes to valuing a property. So what I would do is tend to, like you said, use the income approach, look at what market rents are. Remember, you got to realize too, if the tenants are in there, they may be stuck at a low rate, so that could impact things. And then just figure out what your expenses are, and then what we call in commercials, use a cap rate. Speaking of that, I was doing an appraisal up in, where was it? It was kind of in Hollywood up that way. And it was, somebody had passed away. It was for an estate. So it was kind of like a paired home, like a duplex, and they were going to sell it. And they had a tenant in there. The tenant was actually watching the man that passed away. So they're going to sell, the family's going to sell it. So they were going to, needed to get the tenant out. It was going to cost them $250,000 to get the tenant out, because he'd been there, and you can't get him out. So that's what he said. If you want me to leave, it's $250,000. That's a lot of money. Yeah. And it's just, yeah. So they have the rent control up there, and there's just a lot of things going on. So it's
a reminder, vote no on 33, rent control.
Yeah. I got to put my sign up on right in front. Yeah. Yeah.
And then one more question.
Yeah.
Townhomes, because there's no legal definition of townhomes. I know you used the term just a little bit ago, right? Versus condos. They're all condominiums.
Right. To me, a townhome is just an attached garage. You know, if it's got a garage to it, and I always call it almost like a direct access garage. So like with my units down there, I call them townhomes, but they are condominiums. And then a condo, I say, is just kind of a stacked unit or maybe side by side, and it doesn't have a garage.
Okay.
Maybe like a carport or something like that. That's how I define it, but I think it's vague. You know, there's detached condos now. There's just anything and
Yes.
everything you
Yeah.
have. So
Yeah.
when I look for properties, and I'm sure you guys do the same, is I just do attached and detached.
Mhm.
That's how I look at stuff. And then now there's ADUs. So like on my house up in the desert, I actually added an ADU to that. So it's an 800 square foot ADU. So there's actually an MLS now where you can look
You
up the
can add
property.
that, yes.
Yeah, there's a little ADU thing so you can pull up properties. And like in Irvine, that's probably not a very common thing, but man, you get up in LA and a lot of these other areas down in San Diego, everybody's doing ADUs. Everybody is. They're all over the place.
So how do you give value to it? Because it's still one alienable unit when you add an ADU. How do you give value to the ADU?
Obviously you try to find another sale, which was kind of impossible for a while. Now you're starting to see sales. So you can look through that. Hey, I want this house with an ADU, do that. A lot of times, you know, when you get into older areas, again, like San Diego, for instance, you would, I look into 2 to 4 units and see a lot of times there's a house with a, you know, like a separate guest house or something like that or whatever. So I crisscross that way. I cross it every which way I can to find comps. So I unfortunately do a lot of comp checks. I really do for my clients. So, you know, hey, we're looking at this, you think that's close? And, you know, that's all we'll try to say, yep, that looks close. When I do these flips, they're going in and dropping a bunch of money. They're adding ADU, they're doing all this different stuff. So I look, you know, that's how I do that. And fortunately, like I said, fortunately, the data's there now. So you're starting to see that more and more.
So you're comparing that to a duplex.
Yeah, you
Price
could,
wise.
depending, you know, hopefully it's somewhat similar. You know, a lot of times the duplexes are they're not great properties, but a lot of times you see a duplex where it's a house really with an ADU, what I would call an ADU. So you just kind of look at them and again, like kind properties, the best you can do. You know, that's what I always try to do. And I'll just say, so when I'm doing commercial stuff, I'll go up 5 miles, which when you do a radius 5 miles, it's huge. But like in residential, you're really not supposed to go more than a mile on that. So, you know, you just got to try to find. So like when we're doing these flips, we a lot of times go out 1.5 miles to find the comps that we need, you know, to make them, not to make them work, but just to, you know, have good comparables in there. So,
All right.
I have a question. So when we're talking about square footage, right, it's pretty sensitive. Everybody really sensitive about square footage.
Yep.
And as a realtor, I noticed once we put on our mass, like in new listing, and there's the options, you know, either from appraiser or estimate. Definitely estimate is not good. And we can got the numbers, different number from different resource. You know, seems like sometimes we got a number differently from different resource. Like you mentioned before. So I use the inside track.
Yeah.
So of course, as an agent, we want to pick the largest number as possible.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Okay? Yeah.
Have to.
So my question for you is, can we use inside track if turn out that number is bigger? So can we use that and put on our maps as a listing?
You know, that might be a question for Rich, but I
Yeah,
think
that's-
you
that's
can.
I would say no.
See, he says no, I say yes, but I would say you have to put it in there. And you
You
know
have to
what?
qualify
Yeah.
what you based your square
Exactly.
footage on.
Yeah,
But what about, like, for example, if seller, okay, now I understand what you're saying, but what about if seller has appraisal report before?
Then that's fine.
That's
You can-
fine, we can
you
use that
can
number,
use
if
that.
that
yeah.
number is bigger.
But that's how you're going to qualify the listing in the square footage is based upon appraisal, right?
yeah.
It's not based
And the
upon public
appraisal, make
record.
sure you put who it's supplied by.
Yes,
You know,
okay, yes.
Appraisal supplied by the owner, the mortgage company. That's what happened with this
You need
situation.
to have
I was,
some basis for the representation of the square footage that you're putting in the.
yeah, and I always like to, you know, like I said, with commercial, I always use 2 number. I make sure that I got 2 numbers that are close. You know, 1900, 2000 is close enough for me. It might not be for you guys, but for me, for what I'm doing, a lot of times that's good enough, you know. And then you could always go with a conservative number of 1900, and then you have an appraiser that's at 2000 or something like that. But yeah, just qualify it. Make sure you always state where the numbers are. You know, where's that coming from? You know, assessor is always an easy one. you know, if it's readily available, but I just see the assessor numbers are way off. Not, I shouldn't say that, let me rephrase that. Assessor numbers can be way off. I would say they're right. Track stuff, newer stuff, it should be pretty accurate, but the older stuff, maybe 80% of the time they're right, 75. So you gotta just be real careful and just CYA, you know, that's what I always tell everybody that I've trained over the years, just cover, you know, in commercial, we have to really, really do that. We just have to make comment after comment after comment, where information came from, who supplied it and so forth, and you just cover yourself. So that's real important. Like, you know, Rich, it's just a difference of opinion between him and I. I say it's okay, he said it's not. So that tells you right there, cover yourself. It's real, real important. All right, I gotta run.
Chris, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys. Hopefully that was helpful.
Yes, it was. Thank you for coming by. I really appreciate it.
I just want to mention that I'm in the baseball. I don't know if you guys know John's in the baseball pool. And I've been with John in that baseball pool for 28 years.
Wow, it's a long time.
And
I've been
he,
winning all his money.
well, I was gonna say, you know, he's the commissioner and you know what?
Commissioner.
And he cheats all the time. Because he always wins.
John Fasola cheats. Can you believe that?
I take you for the only person that owes me money right now.
So thank you guys so much. I
Chris,
appreciate
thank
it.
you. I really appreciate your time.
Rich has got my information. If you guys have any questions or anything, just let me know.
Chris, thanks once
Yep,
again.
absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And I want to get back to the representation of square footage. So remember, the information that is on the MLS is the representation of the seller. If you put inaccurate information on the MLS, it's not just a violation, but it's a civil code violation, section 1088. So the implications are far greater. So if you have concerns about the representation of the information or the information putting on the MLS, have your seller sign the MLS printout saying, this is your client's, the seller's representation. This is the accurate information. That's what we want to do. But they should have some basis of square footage when they're giving you a number. Not just because I think it's 5,000 square feet, right? I want it to be 5,000 square feet when it's not, especially when you look at the assessor's records and it's 4,000 square feet. I can see you have a question.
Question about spring food, that there's trash everywhere with.
Yeah.
Square footage all seems right, but the number of rooms seems to be off all the time. But it looks like when, I mean, you physically look at it, they have closets, they have, you know, windows, egress, ingress. But for some reason, it's always like one less.
The assessor's records vary. Is that what you're suggesting? Well, if you can visually see it, and if it's a representation of the seller, if you think there's a question, well, first of all, could it be a permitted or unpermitted room? It's probably new housing, and so there are options. I think you just obviously visually will see that. But I think where it becomes the biggest issue is that someone will call an office as a bedroom, and it may not have two forms of ingress or egress. Is it really a separate bedroom? Most likely not in my example. So you may have to have an addendum sign in which the buyer is acknowledging that this separate room, even though classified as a bedroom on the MLS, is not a bedroom.
It has ingress, egress, and it has closet.
A closet isn't even necessary. It's the ingress and egress. That's my perception in regards to what's necessary. But if it has a closet, I think that's even a stronger argument.
Is there anything, to do with, you know, the windows have to be a certain,
I think 3 feet, no higher from the ground, something like that.
Big enough to crawl out of for an emergency.
But yeah, if it's a little bathroom window, obviously that's not going to be a form, you know, those little windows at the top of the bathroom. It's not going to be a separate. And it's not reported properly with the assessor, which is the biggest issue.
an appraiser, when they see that, and they go and they take a walk at the house, and they see this is obviously a 4-bedroom house, that there's no additional bills or anything, it's all the original, just, you know,
I don't think they're going to contest it necessarily, even though their report there might be a note in there saying it doesn't comply or it doesn't necessarily match that of the assessor's records. But he's saying so often he finds that the assessor's records may not necessarily be accurate.
What's it about 80%?
Yeah, not very high. It's pretty low. Yeah, and then if there are improvements, sometimes we have to contact the assessor to have that information reported also, because buyers will now dispute what they believe they're buying. They think there's less value.
Or what you mentioned when it would it be appropriate to bring comps? Is it more often the listing side brings the comps or the buyers?
Typically, that's who's usually giving access to the appraiser as opposed to the agent representing the buyer. So yeah, I think it's a good idea. If you have supporting information, why wouldn't you do that? And it sounds like, obviously most people are welcoming to that. And then just think if there's an off-market property, something that's not on the MLS, but it's a matter of public record that you're aware of, and it's favorable, why wouldn't you bring that to the attention of the appraiser?
And then for my last question, I just didn't want to take this.
That's okay.
But when he said something about, sometimes I go back 1 year to look for an appropriate.
Yes.
He's not necessarily looking for a price per se, he's just looking for like the movement, like he's adding some sort of multiplier factor.
No, he's looking for a property that more likely matches the subject property.
Then he's like, this, what that house sold for a year ago.
No, actually, then he's going to apply a factor. We've been seeing that prices have increased by 6%. He's going to use that in regards to making a determination what the value of that house would be today compared to the subject property.
That's really more of like use it as a base and then. Apply it.
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Any other questions? No? Well, thanks for coming. Now, wait, before we finish, does everybody turn their cards in? You have a card? It's in here already? Okay. I'm not choosing. Hey, Steve. Right. How many cards in here, Carlos? You want to choose one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Choose two.
MJ is filming you. Yeah, choose two.
Okay, here's two.
No way.
Throw that one away.
Did I choose mine?
And MJ.
I wasn't even looking. You guys saw, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Wait,
He has sticky stuff on his card. No, I'm.
Wow, that's so funny.